Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode with Zach and I of the Canadian Story. Well, this is a special series that we're going to be doing called the Take Back Alberta, presented by Take Back Alberta. We're going to be interviewing all of the leadership candidates in the United Conservative Party of Canada or of Alberta leadership race. So Todd Loewen is someone who has stepped forward. He's a champion of the values that Zach and I hold dear, and has been an advocate in Alberta for standing up against medical tyranny. But he's so much more than that. And I thought that all the listeners would probably like to get to know, who is this man who is running to be Premier of Alberta? Who is this man who was kicked out of his own caucus for standing up against the Premier that eventually the party's like, we don't want you anymore. So Todd, welcome to the show. Why don't you share a little bit with our listeners about what makes you tick, your background, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of the interview.
Well, thank you very much, Dave. Appreciate this opportunity. And yeah, looking forward to this leadership race. I had a chance in the past to speak up and speak out for Albertans, and I felt that this would be an opportunity to carry on that message that I was bringing forward. When I was kicked out of caucus, I felt that I was bringing a message to the Premier and to caucus from Albertans. And at that time, they decided to kill the messenger. They kicked me out of caucus, and away we went. And that started basically a year of being able to have that freedom to speak out and represent my constituents. It hasn't always been easy. It's been a lot of work, but that's the job of an MLA, is to represent their constituents. And when I kind of look back, in the past 6 months or so, and realize who might be coming forward to take Jason Kenney's place, I felt it was an opportunity for me to continue that representation of the people and take it to the next level. Obviously, I complained a lot about the situation and the way the government was being operated and the top-down approach. And so this was me putting my money where my mouth is and standing up and taking that representation to the next level, which is to run for leadership.
Yeah, so you're running to be the leader of the United Conservative Party. And for those who don't know, that means that he would immediately, upon winning, become Premier if he were to win, because the current Premier, Jason Kenney, has stepped down after only getting 51.4% in his leadership review vote. So share with the listeners a little bit, who are you? Like, what's your background? What did you do for work? Where do you live most of your life? Why do you love this province? Like, what is your Alberta story?
Well, I was born and raised in Alberta. I spent most of my life here, about 50 years, right in the community where I live now, near the town of Bellevue. I live on a farm there. I was raised on a farm, a cow-calf operation that my dad had. And so, I always say this, whenever I go anywhere, the best part of any trip I've ever been on is driving in the yard, coming back home and getting back to Alberta where I really love, and I plan to spend the rest of my life. I love this province. It's given myself and my family great opportunities. And I just want to see that continue to the next generation. I have 8 grandchildren, and I'd love to see them to, have the opportunities that I've had and my family's had, into the future. And I think Alberta can be that beacon of hope, actually around the world. We do have a lot of opportunities maybe other locations don't have, but we need to be able to take advantage of those opportunities and really show that we can be, free, prosperous, and have that opportunity that I think everybody desires to have.
Oh, absolutely. I think, and you've been one of the people that have stood up for those freedoms and those opportunities the most over these last 2 years. I would even say more than Drew Barnes in a sense, because Drew's always been a bit of a cantankerous fellow, and like he's had his opinions, but people in the caucus loved you. You're the guy making the pancakes. You were always the guy that was there, taking care of everyone, helping. You're an exemplification of the salt of the earth Alberta mentality of hard work. Raised on a farm, you get it, the rural lifestyle. I think a lot of Canadians don't understand that Alberta is the most rural province in this country, and a lot of people don't know what that means, right? They're like, well, more people live in rural in Ontario, and that's true, but as a proportion, that's way more urbanized. And actually, every other province in this country is far more urbanized than Alberta, including Saskatchewan, which has a way larger portion of its population in its two major cities than we have in our two major cities. So would you share a little bit with the listeners about the different perspective that being in Alberta, or a rural Alberta, brings to the table, and how you were, like you said, you were representing your constituents. I'm a rural Albertan, born and raised. I've lived in cities for a lot of my life, but in my heart of hearts, I'm a rural Albertan. What is special about Alberta, and what is special about our rural roots?
Well, I think one thing that's interesting is rural Alberta is where the bulk of our economy is generated, with the oil and gas sector, the farming sector, and the forestry sector. And of course, it's more than just that, but that's some of the main things right there. So when we look at our economy and how it's operated, where Alberta gets its resources from, and where the jobs are created, a lot of that happens in rural Alberta, and a lot of that, of course, leads into the city. So I think it gives a bit of a deeper appreciation of where things happen and how things happen. When we look at how the oil and gas sector works, and how people are traveling from across Canada actually to work in our oil and gas sector, it gives, I think, a little bit better perspective of how things operate within the province. Of course, I love going to the cities too when I have those opportunities, and anybody that lives in rural Alberta is traveling to the city for some of the things that we don't have in the small towns. My constituency that I represent, to drive between the furthest communities is a 5-hour drive across. So it's a big area. The largest community is about 2,700 people. So, it is quite a bit different than what I think the average person that lives in urban Alberta, would realize. And I think that does give a bit of a perspective. But of course, we do rely on our cities, the small cities and the large cities, for services that we don't have in rural Alberta. And so we appreciate those opportunities to go to the city and get those services that we don't have.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't want to demean the people that live the urban lifestyle, but I think one of the big disconnects that happened over the pandemic, and why Alberta responded differently than, say, Ontario, which just gave Doug Ford a massive majority instead of asking him to resign, right? I think it's that there's a big independence kind of mindset in rural communities. Why don't you speak a little bit to the perspective of your constituents, as opposed to, say, the perspective of, say, Casey Madhu's constituents, right? Well, why were they more upset about what was happening than, say, people who live in urban areas?
I think there was we see it within caucus too, and when we were having discussions about the response to COVID, it is a substantially different lifestyle in rural Alberta than urban Alberta, and I'm not saying that one's better than the other. It just is different, because in rural Alberta, a lot of times people want to go to town maybe once a week, get the mail, get a few groceries, and that's it. That's their only interaction with other people outside of maybe their family and a few close friends and neighbors. That's the only interaction that they have. Where in the cities, as soon as you leave your condo or your house, you're automatically immersed in a larger population. And so I think that's what we've seen within caucus, even where MLAs wanted any kind of restrictions and any kind of response to COVID to be different in some areas versus other areas. There's one community I have in my constituency that there was months on end where there wasn't a COVID case within 100 kilometers of that one community, but they had the same restrictions and shut down their small businesses and everything, just like the larger centers. And again, so there's just those differences that I think are that were hard to get across to the people in charge of government and people making decisions. But in the end, it was interesting that even the urban MLAs, the MLAs representing urban Alberta, were realizing those differences and understanding the frustration, and actually were supporting rural Alberta MLAs those requests for just different ways of managing things.
So do you think, in your experience with going into this, and then you're standing up and criticizing the premier, what was it that led you to that decision? Can you walk the listeners through why you decided to do it? Because I'm sure there's some people who are thinking about voting for you being like, well, why weren't you a team player, right? I mean, obviously I am very grateful for what you did and the people on my side, but we're not the only people listening to this, right? There's people who are maybe on the other side of the equation, and they want to know, why did you feel it was necessary to stand up to the Premier?
Well, again, I think I was basically delivering a message from my constituents and from a wide swath of Albertans. And the frustration that we were elected in the early 2019, and for a few months there, I believe that Albertans were seeing, pretty good things happen in government for a few months. And then after a few months, then I think we started to see things decline. And what my constituents told me first of all, and that goes back to fall of 2019. So basically 6 months before COVID even started, my constituents were saying, okay, he's not standing up to Ottawa, he's not standing up to Justin Trudeau. We're being walked all over. We were promised that we would have, basically a bulldog instead of a lapdog when it came to dealing with Trudeau, and that's not what they've seen. And so the frustration already started to grow then. And if we look at the polls going back to that time period, the fall of 2019, we can see that the UCP started slipping in the polls at that time and started slipping further and further down. And then when we got into COVID, then there was other issues with the flip-flopping on the pandemic response, and that frustrated a lot of people too. So when I wrote that letter, the focus at that time was on the not standing up to Trudeau. And then there was also the not listening to caucus, canceling caucus meetings with virtually no notice. And at the time, I was caucus chair. And so we would plan meetings, we'd get things organized, and all of a sudden the Premier would pull the plug on us. And so that was frustrating to see. So that all built up. And what I'd noticed is coming into that time period when I wrote that letter, we could see this. We hadn't been ahead of the NDP in any polls for, I think, over 6 months at that time. Our fundraising had dried up. The NDP was out fundraising us 2-1, and I could see that we were on the way to an NDP government again. And so I felt it was time to stand up and stop this slide. And when I talked to my constituents and people all across Alberta, they felt the number one thing that we needed to change was the leader. And so that's why I asked the Premier to resign at that time. I felt it was the best thing for the Conservative movement, the best thing for Albertans, and what Albertans wanted at that time. And since then, up until the Premier resigned, we've seen that continual slide. We've seen that lack of fundraising continue, and so that was something that just continued on. And had we nipped this in the bud when we had the opportunity back at last May, then I think we could have saved the Conservative movement in Alberta, in fact, across Canada, because we've seen how this Premier's negatively affected both municipal elections and federal elections. And so this has been very damaging to the Conservative movement in Alberta and across Canada. So again, we could have nipped this in the bud a long time ago. It saved a lot of trouble that we've had to go through in the past year. So again, that's what kind of led to that letter, and then why we ended up where we are here today.
So what do you think? What do you think needs to be done to heal it? Because you're right, there's been a lot of damage to the movement. Now you're someone who was pushed out of caucus by the Premier. Now there's a lot of people who want you to come back in. You're well liked in caucus by a lot of people. So you're a great example of someone who's trying to heal this divide, because a lot of people would have said, well, why do you even want to go back? They're just corrupt, they're broken. I heard this all the time at TBA meetings. Why don't you just start your own thing? We need a new party. Like this, the UCP is corrupt. What's your answer to those people who are disenfranchised with the movement? Like you said, the movement has been damaged by Jason Kenney. How are you, as someone who's running for leader, going to fix that?
Yeah, the biggest thing we need to do is we need to build the trust of Albertans back. And that is the number one thing. I believe the next election will be fought on that issue, and almost that issue alone is this trust. We've seen that what happened in 2015 when the people lost trust in the government, the governing PCs at the time. At that time, they did, when I knocked on doors, people weren't sure if they were going to vote NDP or Wild Rose, but they knew they weren't voting for the PCs. And so it wasn't so much a vote split in 2015 as much as it was a repudiation of the PCs. And we see that, I could see that coming in 2023 if we didn't do something dramatically to change that. Of course, that change was removing the leader. When it comes time to fixing that and building those relationships back up, again, we need to show that Albertans, that they can trust the UCP party, And one of the best ways to do that is have this leadership race and have a lot of different names on the table and options for Albertans, and open up these discussions. And again, we can get things back on track. But once you've lost trust, it is harder to gain it back. It's not easy, but I think it can be done. And we need a leader that Albertans can trust, and somebody that's stood up for Albertans in the past and isn't scared to suffer the consequences.
So so there's a number of areas that probably people have lost trust in their government, right? What are some of the areas you see being the worst, and what would you, as someone who's wants to be the person that we're hiring to fix them, how would you go about it?
Well, if we look at the government, there's many different things that we have problems with. Again, we look at how Alberta's been responding to Ottawa. We look at our healthcare system. We look at a lot of different things that need to be fixed, and that work has to begin. And the best time to start that is today, not a month from now or a year from now. So we need to get started on these things. I think as elected leaders, we need to be able to take responsibility for our actions and the decisions that we make. I think Albertans want people held accountable, and I think that's right. I mean, as elected leaders, we need to be held accountable. We've had different opportunities to have that happen, but what we've seen is that politicians seem to always skate around being held to account, and it's always easy to point fingers when it comes to accountability. And we've seen take decide that they need to blame different government departments or arm's length organizations, and that needs to stop. Accountability has to be held by the person that's in charge, the person that's been elected, because that's where accountability should be.
So how would you bring about more accountability? Did I freeze? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I think you froze up.
No, all good. We'll start again. How would you bring about more accountability?
I think we need to. We had an opportunity to bring about greater accountability with the Recall Act, but what we see the government do is actually water that down and make it so it's near impossible to bring into effect. And we need to operate the government a little bit more like a business and be able to operate it in a way that shows efficiency, effectiveness, and be able to show people that we're getting the job done. I think we've had some issues that we've been dealing with in government for years and sometimes decades, and we haven't found solutions to those yet for some reason. And we need to get past the talking about things and just get to the doing of things. Albertans have seen the can kick down the road on so many issues, and again, we need to become doers instead of talkers.
I like that. That's a really good line. Doers instead of talkers. I like that. We have talked about these things for an absolutely long time. I couldn't agree more. And so on that front, we've got two main issues with any provincial government always, right? Education and healthcare. These are the vast majority of the budget. These are the things that primarily, I would say, provinces are responsible for. Obviously, there's other things, but these are the two that the most people care about and they're most impactful on people's day-to-day lives. So what is your position on healthcare? What do you think is wrong with healthcare? What needs to be done? And then after that, we'll go into education.
Yeah, healthcare, one of the biggest problems we have is AHS. We've seen the centralization of decision-making within AHS. And I think that's been a failure. We haven't seen the results as far as money savings that we said it was going to happen, and also we expected to be better decision making. But instead, I think we've seen a decline in both of those things. We spend a lot of money on healthcare, and the results that we get aren't that great. And a lot of times, when I hear people talking about that, my constituents talking about that, there isn't too many complaints about the frontline staff. Those people are doing the best they can with the system they have, but it's the management of the whole process and how it's being delivered that is frustrating. We have people waiting years for hip and knee surgeries that they're suffering, and it's causing other health problems while they wait. People talk about two-tiered healthcare system. Well, already the wealthy and the people that have means to do that are leaving the province. They're going to the U.S. or other places in the world, going to BC and having these surgeries done and paying for it out of their own pockets to have that done. And so we need to look at things a lot differently. Again, AHS itself, I think, needs to be really worked over and probably dismantled, and maybe go back to some more regional decision making. And then we need to look at other options for healthcare so that people aren't traveling the world spending money elsewhere. Where they could be getting those services done right here in Alberta.
So what do you think, like if you were to say, I like this idea, so break it down, more regionalized, decentralized. I'm a huge fan of that. I think a lot of people are. I do not believe in the centralization of decision-making from a government perspective. But what about education? What do you think needs to be done there? What areas of it would you work on? What areas do you think are going well? That's a huge part of the budget. Healthcare is obviously over 50%, but education is close to 20%. So what's your read on that?
Well, we need to focus, of course, on the basics of education. That's what the education system is, and K to 12 education is to teach the basics. It's not to teach ideology. It's not to teach values and everything that should be taught in the home. That's the parents' responsibility. And again, I think we need to empower parents more in the decision making when it comes to education. We look at the processes that we have now, and I'm not saying there hasn't been some movement towards that kind of idea, but and having that choice in education, I mean, that is good. But I think we can listen more to parents and understand that they're the primary educators of their own children. One thing I've tried to do in almost every town hall I've had, or when the education come up, I've always encouraged people to become involved with the process of electing school board trustees. Those people are very important in how the education system runs right in their own communities. But a lot of times it's overlooked. Everybody gets involved with federal elections and politics. People get involved with provincial and then municipal also. And sometimes we forget about how important it is to have good school trustees that represent the values of the people that they represent. So I think that's probably some of the key things with education right there.
Well, I think this is a really good point, and something that the members of Take Back Alberta would really be interested in is this fact that there's a whole school board system that you can have an impact on, and the voter turnout for that is tiny. Like, we're talking about small jurisdictions of tens of thousands of people. I mean, you could probably speak to your riding and what the school boards look like there, but I don't think very many people show up to vote for those things. Is that the case in your riding?
Yes, it is. Most of I think the trustees, they're, some of them, will win with 80 votes, 100 votes, 150 votes. And so we look at the numbers of people that are eligible to vote and how many actually show up to vote. It is kind of a dismal record there. And again, I think people kind of forget about that opportunity to have that kind of input in the education of the children and the education of their neighbors' children. You don't have to have children in the system to really feel like you need to be involved and because the education of our children is incredibly important for society. There's a reason why it's done. There's a reason why we spend so much money on it, and it's because it is important. It is important to have an educated public and get our children through the system and then prepare them for post-secondary or going into the trades or going into the workforce.
So let's get a little bit more personal, a little bit about your background. So, like, what do you do for fun? What do you enjoy? What's what is the character of Todd Loewen? Like, do you have a family? Or you're married? I assume. Like, what do you like to do with your time?
Well, I'm married. I have five kids. The youngest is 20 years old. And I now have 8 grandchildren, which of course are a joy to have around. Most of them are right close to home here, so we get to spend some time with them. My background is small business. I ran an outfitting company for years, and that company still operates. My son operates it right now, but so that's been my background. So I enjoy the outdoors. I enjoy spending time in the woods and in the mountains and anywhere I can to get off the beaten path. And I really enjoy that. I enjoy some photography and everything. I I live on a farm. I don't actively farm right now. I rent my land out, but I do have bees, and so I enjoy my beekeeping hobby. That's always interesting. So that's kind of some of the things I do in my spare time.
Well, tell us a little bit about beekeeping. What I know that I've recently really got into the honey. There's that friend of Brian Jeans, who you may know in Three Hills, who has that big honey operation. I went and visited it, which was awesome. But would love to hear like beekeeping. Tell us a bit about that. Like, I know the listeners want to know you as a person, not just your policy ideas, right?
Yeah. So no, the life of a bee, how they operate and everything is incredibly interesting. So I enjoy that as a hobby, and I produce a little bit of honey, and I think I give away more than I sell, which is fine. I enjoy doing that, but yeah, the bee industry has its challenges right now. This past winter there's been a lot of winter loss of bees and getting replacements because of the lack of flights coming from places like New Zealand, where we bring replacement bees in from, has made it difficult. We should be able to bring in bees from the United States, from Northern California. There's places that we can bring them in from. We bring queens in from California, but for some reason we can't bring the bee packages in, and that's something that we've been working at with government to try to change that. But yeah, and the area that I represent has the town of Falher, and Falher's the honey capital of Canada. And just a kind of an interesting story is I got a call here. I think it was last summer. I think maybe the summer before. I actually have to think about that. But I had a call from another beekeeper that had got a call and said that there was somebody in the Tim Hortons parking lot in my hometown that had a swarm move into their car while they were So they left the sunroof open, and a swarm of bees had just kind of moved into that car, and so they didn't know what to do. And so I ended up going there, and I had a bee suit and everything, so I went in there, and the main part of the swarm had left the car already, but there was still a couple hundred bees inside the car, which is enough to get anybody's attention.
Right. Yes.
Kind of help evict the bees and move them out of there, and that was kind of an interesting story.
So
wow, I love that you keep bees. That's awesome. My grandpa was a beekeeper as well. So
I had a question, if I may interject. So I am, I guess I would have less proverbial skin in the Alberta leadership game because I'm an Ontario resident. But as an Ontario resident, one of the things that I'm concerned about seeing is an energy independent Canada. So can you talk about how you view Albertan energy and how you might advocate for potentially, and hopefully, I would hope, creating an energy independent Canada?
Yeah, incredibly important. I think if we've learned nothing else from what's happening in Europe, I think we've learned how important energy independence is. And it is horribly frustrating to see us importing oil on the East Coast and not being able to export our oil on the West Coast as much as we should be able to do, and also not being able to provide Eastern Canada with that same oil. We have the most ethically produced oil, the most environmentally safe oil, and that needs to be recognized. For some reason, when we look at the issues, of course, in Europe right now, had we had our oil being provided to our own Eastern Canada, if we'd have had more oil being provided to the U.S. and to be exported through the Gulf or through the West Coast, if we'd had that opportunity to get our oil out there, we wouldn't have some of these countries so dependent on dictatorship oil. And again, it just becomes so important to realize the situation that we're in. We've seen our neighbors to the south try in the past, and actually even more recently, trying to block our oil from coming in. And the problems that it's caused them, and we look at the price of gas right now, all these things are related to our inability or the federal government's unwillingness to allow our oil to get out to the world markets where it belongs. And that's been horribly frustrating. We need to continue to advocate for Alberta oil and tell the world that the good story that we have. And we need to keep that pressure on the federal government to respond to that. In the past, when these projects have been canceled, we've sent strongly worded letters and to no avail, of course. We need to be able to do something a bit more than that and send that message loud and clear that our energy needs to get to the markets.
So what would you do like you said, enough of the talking. What are we going to do? How are we going to get our energy to market?
I think one thing that we've seen happen is we've done a lot of talking about having more autonomy for Alberta. We look at what we campaigned on the 2019 election. We look at the Fair Deal panel and its recommendations. We look at the firewall letter from 2001. We see all those things of where Albertans could be exerting more pressure on Ottawa and gaining more autonomy for ourselves. I think that's one of the things that we could be doing right now when the federal government comes and does something like cancel the tech mine or pass Bill 48 and Bill 69 that hurts our energy industry and hurts Albertans. We've responded with strongly worded letters. There's opportunities to do the things we campaigned on, having our own pension plan, having our own employment insurance, collecting our own taxes, all these things that would save Albertans money and actually cost the federal government money. We've done nothing, none of those things. So, a lot of people say, well, we need to have those things as leverage, but there's no leverage if you never use it, and they know that you're never going to use it. And so
yeah, exactly. How is that leverage?
Leverage is, that's like playing a card game and showing your hand. I mean, you're going to lose every single time.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. Well, that gets us into the important question. I think one that's going to be asked of you a lot, and probably has been asked of you way more than anyone else right now, is: should Alberta remain in Canada?
Yes, and that question has come up a lot, and I think a lot of Albertans right now are frustrated with that. It's interesting. I went back and read the firewall letter from 2001, and that could have been written last week. I mean, the frustrations are still there. We're 21 years later, and we're sitting in the same situation. And as far as independence, that's something that Albertans will decide. I don't think that's up to politicians to decide. Of course, that needs to be done in a referendum, and Albertans will make that decision. But what we can do as politicians is we can do the things that we campaigned on. We can do the things that the people are asking us to do, and those are the things that, like I mentioned before, collect their own taxes, their own pension plan, employment insurance, collect, all those different things that we've talked about and done absolutely zero on. Those are the things that we need to move towards. If Albertans decide at some point they want independence, those are things that need to be done anyways. But again, the independence, that's up to Albertans to decide. But again, we have a lot of things that we can do to gain that kind of basically distance from Ottawa and get some more independence for ourselves as far as how we're doing business with Ottawa. And I think those are things that we can do right away.
So you've been traveling the province a lot, especially during this leadership review, talking to people. I was traveling the province a lot, talking to people. A lot of us were running around. Something unprecedented happened, right? A premier who just won a massive majority government 3 years earlier was essentially forced to step down by a grassroots movement that you and I were both part of. Can you speak a little bit to your experience of that historical moment? Because it was a historical moment. It was big. Like, I think we can't deny that a very large thing has happened. Now, Albertans, we don't really like being treated poorly by our politicians. We have a history of getting rid of leaders that we don't like, but you were a big part of this one. So why don't you share a little bit about what that was like and why you felt, not just that the NDP were going to win. I mean, that was the largest reason that all of us were doing it, but what did you learn about leadership for this time? Because you're going for the top job. You criticized the top job. Now you're going for the top job. What did you learn about leadership from watching the decline and fall of Jason Kenney?
I think one of the main things is listening to people and making people feel like they're heard. I think Albertans have felt that they've been ignored for quite some time now, and that being ignored has followed through with MLAs and caucus being not heard or listened to. And when we look at Albertans, they elect MLAs to go to the legislature and go into caucus and represent them in those places. And if that representation is ineffective or not listened to, then they have a reason to lack trust in the process. So I think that's one of the biggest things that needs to be changed. We need to be listening to caucus council members, we need to be listening to Albertans and be able to bring their views forward. And not everybody's going to be happy about every decision, and we understand that in politics, that's not going to happen. But everybody has to at least feel like they were listened to, and I think that's one of the things that's most important for people in leadership to do, is to be able to listen, be able to understand the different viewpoints that come forward, and try to work collaboratively with everybody. And it seems like anybody that's spoken out or said anything against the government, the immediate response is to attack and to slander and to call names, and I don't think that's the proper response for that. I think we can work with people, even people that we're on different ends of the political spectrum. We can have those respectful discussions, and in the end, at least come up with something that they feel is representative of their views.
So let's talk about the World Economic Forum, and I think it's important to talk about the vaccines, because a lot of the people that are involved in Take Back Alberta felt suddenly like they had to get involved in politics because their rights were being stripped from them without what they felt like was their consent. I assume you're probably not quite as extreme as some of those individuals, but what is your perspective on what's going on around the world that has led to this strange place that we're in, where rights are no longer being respected? We just had a journalist on who simply posted a video, a 10-minute video from the convoy talking about her personal observations, and the next day she was fired, right? What's going on, in your opinion?
Yeah, it is interesting to see. We've seen this backlash from the political elite, basically, where they've instead of talking to people, instead of listening to people and understanding their views and trying to at least come up with some sort of collaboration, we've seen that immediately what happens is the name calling comes out. They start lashing out, and they try to discredit the individuals to try to destroy the message. And there's a lot of influences, I think, from around the world that are happening. We need to understand that in Alberta, we can make decisions for Albertans right here in Alberta. We have intelligent people that can give us good advice, and if we do need advice from outside the province, there's people we can go to. There's all sorts of people that we can talk to and get good information from. But in the end, we need to make the decisions here in Alberta, not made on somebody else in the world making decisions for us. The people around the world that are making decisions like that aren't making those decisions for the best interests of Albertans. They have their own agendas, and we need to have an Alberta agenda here that speaks to Albertans and represents Albertans.
So what was your perspective on the vaccine mandates?
Right from the start, I spoke out against them. Previous to COVID and the pandemic and everything, there's no way we would have ever allowed anything like this happen, that the labor legislation wouldn't allow these things to happen. But for some reason in this situation, all that was brushed aside, and it was all of a sudden fine. The most frustrating thing, or I should say one of the most frustrating things for myself through this whole thing was watching people lose their jobs, lose their livelihoods, and watching that suffering and pain that they had. When we look at what happened to healthcare workers, where they were threatened to lose their job by a certain day, and then a few days before that they'd say, okay, no, just kidding, we're going to give you another month, and then and then a few days before that, oh, just kidding, we'll give you another month, and then all of a sudden in the end fire them, and then 3, 4, 5 days later come back and say, oh, you know what, we'll hire you back again. I can't imagine living my life, for my source of income, my livelihood, what I went to school and educated for, being threatened for months on end, and then losing that. Then all of a sudden somebody coming back and saying, okay, yeah, you know what, we'll bring it back. I can't imagine what that life would have been like in those homes with that kind of thing hanging over them. I think that was cruel and totally unnecessary. Those people worked through the whole pandemic. Most of them got COVID at work, brought it home to their families, and then to be treated like that in the end, I think was incredibly disrespectful and just not right.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you standing up from the beginning. As you know, I'm helping Roman Baber right now in his leadership campaign, and for the same reason, I just really respect what you're doing. Yeah, you stood up for us when we needed it most, and I really respect that. So thank you. And I know Zach is thankful for that as well. I think not enough, too much for criticizing the politicians who did wrong. And we need to also, as I said, in every one of those TBA rooms, we have to stand behind the people who stood for us, right? So I would just want to thank you on that. We only got a little bit of time here left, but I'd like to go into a little bit of what your vision for the future of Alberta is. Like, what do you think Alberta could become? I think I'm really excited about Alberta's potential right now. I mean, as tragic as what's happening around the world is, I would rather be nowhere else than right here, right now. We have all the energy in the world we need. We can grow all the food that we need. We are growing all the food that we need right now. We're a relatively free place, becoming more free, hopefully, after what just happened. And I mean, while Ottawa doesn't treat us well, we have a lot going for us. So what do you think Alberta could become?
Yeah, I think what Alberta needs to become is a beacon around the world and freedom and prosperity. Again, we're blessed with certain things that other jurisdictions around the world don't have, and so we have to acknowledge that. But I think when we look at our political environment, our environment itself, the actual outside environment, I think we can really be setting examples, and I think we do already. And somehow we just need to get that out. When we look at our resource extraction, the environmental, the way it's done environmentally. And what's interesting is it isn't like we've just all of a sudden said, okay, we're doing great, kick back and put our feet up and relax. We're constantly working on different ways to make things even better yet. And that's what we should be doing, because we can be that example to the world on the environmental level, on the human rights level, on freedom, on prosperity, and allow the people of Alberta to really thrive and prosper. And we need to have the people to have the opportunity to raise their families the way they want, raise their children, and have that opportunity to excel in all aspects of life. And again, that's where I see Alberta's future. I think we can be that beacon. We can be that place for people around the world to look to and say, you know what, they did it, we can do it too. And we can all get to this level where people are treated fairly and have an opportunity to prosper.
No, I couldn't agree more. How do we get there? Like, what are give me your 3 ways in which, what would you change to make us a beacon of freedom and prosperity to the world, and what's possible when we truly tap into the human potential that is Albertans? We're a very great and entrepreneurial people, but like, what are the 3 things? What are you going to change?
I think one of the things is and I hate to kind of go back to the same things over and over again, but again, a lot of it has to do with trust. We need to gain the trust of Albertans so that they know that they have a government that's listening to them and representing them, and we need to be able to prove to Albertans that we can give them freedom and give them the opportunity to do what they want and to live their lives the way they want. We don't need government interfering in every little thing. And I think one other thing that we can do is, when it comes to getting investment in Alberta and creating jobs and having people, prosper here and be able to do those things that they want to do, we need to have an environment to do so. And when we look at even though we have done a lot in reducing red tape and bureaucracy, there's so much more to go yet. We need to be able to make sure that when a company wants to set up and do business here, that we get that approval process as short as possible. There's a process we have to go through. I understand that we have to have environmental standards, we have to have safety, we have to all those things, but it doesn't take years to do those things. It should only take months at the most to do some of these approvals on these big projects, and that way we can attract that investment, keep the investment right here in Alberta. Have more processing done here, so we have value-added products on all of our industries. And if we can do that, then I think we'll be in a pretty good situation as far as being that beacon of hope and that beacon of where other jurisdictions around the world can look at us and say, okay, we can do this too.
What's a jurisdiction around the world that you admire and would like to model aspects of here?
Boy, that's a good question. I don't know that there's any that I really look at that well that I would understand that well. I'd hate to comment on some and find out there's other aspects that I'm not familiar with how they do business. But I don't know. We could look to some of the states. I think some of the states have done some really good things along the way as far as their freedom and their tax regiments and everything that have allowed that investment opportunities to come in. So I think there's some of the states that we could probably look to off the top. There's I guess many aspects of some of those states, and we might not want to be emulating, but there is certain aspects that I think we can learn from for sure.
Yeah, I've always thought that the role of, let's call it, public policy entrepreneurs, because I think there's a difference between a politician and a public servant and a public policy entrepreneur, which is, it sounds like more of what you are a little bit. You want to fix things. You want things to work. You want to come up with some new ideas, or even go back to some old ones like decentralizing the AHS, which I totally agree with. The difference, generally speaking, is we're not just following a pattern. We've realized something's wrong, right? Something's not working for Albertans. And that's really what being an entrepreneur is. It's finding a problem and saying, can I fix this problem, right? And that's kind of what you're doing here. I've always thought, I agree with you entirely. You don't want to like point to a jurisdiction, say you like that jurisdiction, and then say, oh, well, and then someone will come after you because this is gotcha culture, right? And say, oh, he likes these people. But for example, I talk a lot on this podcast about Singapore. I'm always so impressed with the fact that basically a city grew out of a swamp and became one of the wealthiest, the most prosperous cities on earth. And I always said, if a swamp can produce Singapore, what could Alberta be?
Yeah.
Right. What's possible? So like, give me a pie in the sky. Like you're not saying you're going to do this as the leader, but like, what if you just had to like imagine a utopia of what Alberta was possible? What's one aspect that you think would be different than now?
Well, that's a good question. I guess I look at the broad range of things that I think can be fixed. And I think you're right. I guess when I look at a problem and I look at what we have going on in Alberta, I automatically want to fix. I want to have solutions. I want to have things happen immediately. And maybe that's not realistic in government, but we have to be able to go quicker than what we're doing now. So I guess if I had one pie in the eye, aspect of government of how things operate in Alberta, it would probably be back to that situation where there's so many delays in processes here that I think that we need to be able to shorten those timelines. Again, maybe this isn't exactly where you're headed with this, but when I look at some of the biggest issues, if we look at grazing leases, for instance, for years, when you buy a grazing lease, you can go through the process of buying it. You can sign the deal. You have the lawyers take care of everything. The lawyers are holding the money, and then it takes 11 months for the government to actually transfer the grazing lease from one rancher to the next rancher. And where else in business could you buy something, put up the money, everything's all done, all the lawyers' work is all done, and then you're going to wait 11 months?
That's ridiculous.
And those, some of those time frames are from out, but it was like that for decades. And when I see that's happening on almost every level of government, I look at one of the towns in my constituency wanted to buy a few hundred acres from the Alberta government so they could expand their town. They had a waiting list of 70 plus businesses that wanted to set up and operate. And it took almost 9 years for the town to purchase a couple hundred acres of just solid bushland that wasn't being used at all from the provincial government. We have an area where they wanted to set up an industrial subdivision in one of the municipalities here. And that process has taken 3, 4, 5 years. And when I talked to the minister about it, I said, we know that the answer to this development is going to be yes. How fast can we get to yes? Can we just skip all this stuff and just say, okay, the answer is yes. This is what you need to do it, and let's make it happen. But again, that industrial subdivision, they lost literally billions of dollars worth of investment because of it taking 3, 4, 5 years to actually be able to get that property from the government, from the province of Alberta, and be able to set it up and start being able to sell it to the companies that want to do value-added projects of our own resources right here in Alberta.
Wow, that is a great answer. I love that answer. And the detail, I would say everyone pay attention to that. This is a man who pays attention to details of policies and problems that he finds. And really, in a leader, what do we want? We want people who have solutions to problems that we agree are problems, right? There are leaders who propose solutions to problems we don't think are problems, like Justin Trudeau. And that's not the kind of leader we want, but we want one that we agree on the problems and the solutions. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Todd. I'm very honored to have you on the show. Thanks for the short notice. And thank you for standing up for Albertans and standing up against the NDP, which I know everyone, at least in my organization, is a big fan of. So I'll let you close with your remarks or any remarks you want to give. And then please let people know where they can find you and what you need from them in this leadership race.
Okay, well, thank you very much, David. Thanks, Zach. Appreciate the time here too. With the leadership race going on, one of the main things is, of course, membership sales. Members of the party will decide who's the next premier of Alberta. And I know a lot of Albertans are frustrated at this point, and they're like, well, I don't know if I want anybody, maybe they don't care, but on October 6th, there will be a new premier in Alberta. And I think Albertans have a chance to buy a $10 membership in a UCP and have that say. My website is toddloewen.com, and Loewen spelled Loewen. So toddloewen.com, you can go and you can buy a membership, you can donate online. And so there's opportunities to be involved in this political process and basically choose who the next premier is going to be. There's a lot of candidates running, and I think that's great to see. There's a lot of ideas being expressed, and I think we'll learn a lot, and we'll have some good ideas that myself, when I'm looking at some of the other candidates, and I'm not discrediting their ideas based on where the idea is coming from. Every idea, we need to look at carefully and not, invalidate an idea because it's coming from a certain individual. I think there's all sorts of good ideas that will be coming forward in this leadership campaign. I look forward to hearing them, look forward to the vigorous debates, and look forward to having a new premier on October 6th.
Absolutely. I think we're all looking forward to a new premier. Well, thank you, Todd. And we got to go on to our next one, but thank you very much and have a great day.
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks, Zach. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at TheCAD That's the CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great our country is.